Welcome to the second part of my analysis of the Paltry Nude starts on a spring voyage. Now, one thing that I failed to mention in my first video is that the Paltry Nude, or at least the speaker, is attempting to distinguish the Paltry Nude, to establish her on her own terms. We've already said that we know that she's being compared to the nude of nudes, the Botticelli's Venus, and she is paltry, whereas the uh, Venus is of monumental importance and of significance in Western art. We also did say that she is not on a shell, so fundamentally, her, found, her foundation in her own painting is other than a shell. We have found in this in the first stanza that it is a strand of seaweed. So she is emerging as something distinct of the sea, as is the Venus, shell versus seaweed. But moreover, she is in diametrical opposition directionally to the Venus. The Venus, as we saw in the painting, is coming ashore. She is starting for the sea. So one nude, the nude, is the absolute nude, is being is arriving, whereas this upstart nude is departing. Now, by saying upstart, I myself am facing up to the um, analysis that of this poem that precedes me. For example, Helen Vendler speaking about the lesser American Venus, who pales in comparison, but who builds up uh, uh, in gravitas or significance as American art develops with respect to the overweening influence of the source art, Western art, European art. That's, of course, in the background of my mind, and I'll perhaps return to it. But I did want you to know also that I have read what other people have said about this poem, and I may say more about it. I don't pretend to be completely original, but I guess I am making a video because I think that I've seen a lack of close reading, word by word, line by line meaning, and not that I mean to fill a gap, but for my own feeling, I feel that I'm making up for something that is missing out there, at least as far as I know. Now, as we enter the second stanza, we come across another misusage. But let's read the stanza. Um, she too is discontent and would have purple stuff upon her arms, tired of the salty harbors, eager for the brine and bellowing of the high interiors of the sea. This word discontent, it slips past us because it simply sounds like the opposite of content. She's not content, she's discontent. But we know as native speakers that this is not an adjective, this is a noun. Discontented would be the correct adjective form for this. Discontent is a state of unease. It can be used for an individual, but it also is used for a group, a class of people, a population. Their discontent spread among the populace as the wheat ration was reduced, let's say. Um, in addition, even if we were to use the correct form, so to speak, it doesn't match the reality. The line would seem to suggest when she says she too is discontent or discontented, the speaker is actually drawing a conclusion of similarity between the two. However, as I look at the face of the Venus, that's not a face that is discontented. Neither is it really content. It just is. But we come back to the Venus as the absolute, the transcendent figure um, that um, is that bears really none of the marks or the impacts, the influence of um, of of life in the world. There isn't a psychology behind that face, which is not to say that it's empty, but it is simply what it is. It is beauty in and of itself, not even really a pose of beauty, although we imagine that a human being posed for Botticelli was the basis of the Venus. But when I look at this face, I do not see any mark of emotional affect of any kind, either contentedness, or discontent. So we not only have another misusage in the same way that archaic was a misusage, we have something that's incorrect, a misapprehension of what is in the painting. Now, we can have imperfect memories of what is in a painting, and perhaps that's what is at foot here. And the misapprehensions continue. And would have purple stuff upon her arms. Um, Before we deal with the particular um, unreal conditional and the perhaps some of the fine feeling of verb tense and aspect in this line, I want to look at the painting again because we do have this figure to the well on our right relative to the Venus, presenting a cloak to put around the um, the Venus as she steps off onto land. This could best be described as a pink cloak that's being extended. A pink cloak will be around her arms, will be upon her arms when she ultimately steps onto land. Now, she hasn't, and in the poem, she doesn't. She never has any material on her arms. And she certainly isn't going to receive purple stuff. Purple is a distinctly different color than pink. Stuff, moreover, is material. It's not cloak. It hasn't yet been finalized or formalized. It's not it's not a finished garment that can be presented to a person. Purple stuff is like matter being placed upon you. So again, we have a situation which is at variance from the facts of the painting. Not only is the Venus not discontent, she is in no position. There's nothing like purple stuff. Or maybe more correct to say, the stuff being presented to her is pink. So there is a deviation away from the actual painting, um, perhaps a departure from the reality of the painting into the imaginative space of this painting, in which a nude, which is intentionally unlike the Venus, is being constructed. Now, again, remember this is all in the present tense. This is happening now. It's a direct imaginative experience of these materials that make up the painting, and perhaps as we speak, are going in the actual act of painting to construct this nude. Um, would have purple stuff upon her arms. Now, this is, as I said, an unreal conditional, but there's a condition missing that under which it would be real, it would happen. What is the condition that's preventing this from happening? If she were not going to see, she would have purple stuff upon her arms, um, the way that the Venus, as we project, um, as we imagine the Venus stepping off onto land and receiving a pink cloak. So, although it's incorrect, there is a distinct difference between purple stuff and uh, the pink cloak. They're alike enough for this still to make sense to us. That perhaps a mistake has been made in remembering what color or what actually it was that the maiden was holding. Maybe in the memory darkens and uh, undifferentiates what the thing was. It just becomes uh, material of a slightly different color. But it doesn't change the fact that there's that diametrical opposition in direction between the two nudes. Again, it's another way of saying, as we probe, that the paltry nude is bound for sea, unlike the Venus who is coming into land. We misremember things all the time, and not intentionally. But what inclines us towards misremembering is emotion. We often say that emotion colors our experiences and perhaps even influences or distorts, to some extent, memory. If you notice here, she is tired of the salty harbors and eager for the brine and bellowing. Unlike Venus, she is under the sway of moods. She has a psychology. She is not free of emotional impact. Things affect her. Um, Something affects her negatively. She's tired of something, and she's eager for something else. These are two sides of the same coin. And this appears to be the motivation that is driving her out to sea. Something lacking in her experience and something beyond her experience that beckons. Again, you could say that this is the psychological roots, the emotional basis for exploration and an active creation. In other words, artistic invention is not driven by intellect. It is driven by life in the world and the influence that events have upon us. Um, our our moods again, the things that we therefore want to escape from, and the things that we want to get to. Um, Again, this is another way in which the paltry nude is diametrically opposed to the Venus. The Venus is transcendent, almost not of the world in a way, or as far from the world as one could be, whereas the paltry nude is unapologetically part of this world and subject to its forces. As I go deeper into this stanza, I want to formally state this. Art has two components to it. Uh, Art must be within the world. As I said, it must have its ear to the ground and is thus bound up with human matters, which means it has to it has to feel, channel psychological and physical needs. In other words, the reality of human life in the world, mortality. Um, at the same time, it attempts to transcend the limitations of the human world. In doing so, it invariably um, becomes involved in pos posterity. Could we dare say the will to posterity, um, to survive, which is ultimately, I guess, ultimately goes back to the recognition that human life ends, and all of that work that you do, those routines and rituals that sustain you, will not keep you from death. Um, so, how does art fulfill these needs in this stanza? Well, first, what is the salty the salty? What is the paltry nude tired of? It says that she's tired of the salty harbors. Uh, Harbors are like the sea in that they're salty, um, and she's setting out for the sea. So that's an interesting similarity. Also, perhaps obvious. It's hard to think of a harbor that is not salty. But a harbor itself is different than the sea in that it is either a human construction or it is a natural formation that's exploited by human beings to protect its ships, and to preserve them in the way that they're not protected and preserved on the open sea. Salty also refers to rough and coarse language. Again, we're talking about usage. Um, there is a kind of usage of the streets that we may recoil from, while we are still engaging in another usage that someone else might find impenetrable or unpleasant. Again, it's a very parochial view of utterance. But again, we come across another possible allusion to the confines, um, or the constraints imposed upon us by salty language or elevated language. Any such usage um, is kind of police-like, is going to monitor our own use, and therefore it is something we might recoil from. What is she eager for? She's eager for the brine. Now, this is interesting. Much in the same way that the harbor and the sea are alike in that they are salty, um, salty and brine are alike in that they are degrees of salt content or salt concentration in water. So you could perhaps create a continuum of saltiness from merely salty water. I did read up, and I found that brine actually encompasses natural salt water. That would be the minimum of brininess, or to meet the threshold of brininess. But brine is many times more concentrated, and it needs to be because it has a particular use. For one thing, it's used for the preparation or preservation of meats. So, in this sense, what you're going out to is bears a lot of the similarities to what you're leaving. And in fact, what you leave is really, frankly, maybe no different than what you are going to. It's simply a slight change in perspective. And as is the slightness, that can be the difference between salty and brine. Additionally, something can be salty naturally, but brine is almost exclusively a human invention, a creation to increase the intensity, the concentration of salt in water to fulfill a particular need. It's as though, again, we are getting our materials ready for a particular activity in the same way that artist will gather, the visual artist will gather their materials, make judgments about what they can and can't do with a brush on a particular canvas. In the same way that the cook will gather the materials that they need in order to prepare food. Again, we go back to addressing immediate physical needs of human beings. Obviously, without that, there's no artistic enterprise. There are no art projects without the fundamental mortal project of survival and reproduction. Um, Venus herself is the goddess of love, and it's also the goddess of love in the sense of procreation. So, although the Venus herself is this absolute masterpiece, the figure and the mythology behind it is something that's very, very earthy and fundamental. It's hard to think of anything more fundamental than childbirth, and the preservation of, of, of human beings, individual and collectively. She's eager for the brine and bellowing. Now, bellowing is a low sound that comes from deep within, and it communicates the expression of pain, anger, dissatisfaction. Again, we go back to the word of discontent, uh, being being yelled forth, screamed forth from out there in the space, which is interesting because you thought that being discontent, she was seeking contentment. But bellowing is anything but contentment. So, in a sense, I guess you can say there's a contradiction here. The thing that we expected her to be seeking is in reality the thing that she was fleeing, or at least characterized, it spoke something of the state that she was in when she set out to the sea. And what about the sea? We speak of the high interiors of the sea. Now, the first thing that jumps out at me is the notion of the high sea. The high sea is outside of your territorial waters. It is outside of your culture, the laws that govern life in your part of the world, and you're out exposed. You are potentially at risk of 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 encountering storms very far from your coast, or even enemy forces, pirates, who and against whom you may have limited resources with which to defend yourself and react and preserve your life. Now, this can be actually something that's rather exciting about the sea, in that you are at risk of losing your life. Um, Someone once said that Ernest Hemingway once carried his own death warrant in his pocket, and I thought that was really a remarkable statement, which shows someone who was willing to explore, uh, despite the fact, or despite the fact that it necessitated putting their own life in peril. Now, there can be something of this. The high C is very evocative. However, this little bit of usage, this set phrase with suggestive meanings, is disturbed. There is no high C. It's the high interiors of the sea. Now, the sea has depths in the same way that when you bellow, you are bellowing from your depths. But there are no depths here. The sea is described, or something about the sea. It's what should be the depths of the sea are transformed into high interiors. Now, the sea doesn't have interiors. Um, an interior is something that is a space uh, within which, let's say, speaking purely domestically, in a house's interiors are spaces where furniture can be placed and arranged, and the walls of those spaces can receive wall hangings, perhaps like the the Medici villa, which came to for some time bear, or upon which the Botticelli's gift, The Birth of Venus. Botticelli's Venus was a wall hanging in an interior. And so we're seeing purple stuff upon the arms. We have a sense of an interior that is, interiors are designed. It is a, in a sense, a canvas for a certain kind of artistic creation, which is domestic, the human being arranging things in their lives in the same way that the artist arranges their materials. So this is very much about the artist deciding what materials to use and how to arrange them. And also, in the same breath, rebelling from arrangement, and would have purple stuff upon her arms. She does not. She went to sea, so she escaped being an object. When I say that I would have purple stuff upon my arms, I think of two possible interpretations. The most obvious is that I'm an object upon which stuff is put. I have no agency. I am a thing. At the same time, if I say that I would have that done, I would have that, I am still an object, but I'm consciously receptive towards putting myself in a position to receive something. I'm not going to argue against it. I'm not going to resist it. So as I tie up this second stanza, I think we start to see what I meant about the paltry nude being a moment in the art object's existence in time, from now through the future, that it it arises from the human world of matter. It addresses, and it is itself a, a product of drives that are not intellectual, that are not abstract in their nature. They're psychological, uh, and in and through which uh, very, very primal needs are addressed: survival, procreation. Um, this individual is very much of and with the world, while at the same time rebels against the whole notion of having something exert force to position you. There's a positioning that resists positioning, if I could say it that way. It's fraught. It's tense. But this is the nature of artistic creation. So I will move on to stanza 3 in my next video.